have the easiest job in this session today. I'm just going to introduce our moderator, and I'll jump back up at the end to give you a little bit of a snapshot of our state digital equity planning process so that you'll know how to engage in that process over the next 7 to 8 months. So Brooke Barron is facilitating our session today, and she is our Federal Program Officer for NTIA, not to be confused with NDIA, who are all on the stage today together. Brooke has spent the last 3.5 years working as an advisor in the Speaker's office in the Maine legislature, and is a Colby College graduate, so I know she feels really at home coming back to Waterville, and also has her master's degree from the University of California, Berkeley, and has worked, prior to working with the legislature, also spent some time working in Shelley Pingree's office. So we're just very happy that we have her focused, working with us in Maine, and when we first met her, I thought that NTIA was telling us that she was our regional representative working with all the states. And then we found out she's really all ours. She's just for the state of Maine. So we're very lucky to have her and so excited she could help facilitate the session today. Oh, you don't need that.
Thank you, Maggie, for the very warm welcome. I am so lucky to be working in Maine. I think my colleagues across the country and other states are all jealous because Maine is just the best. But I just wanted to say a word or two about NTIA from the federal side, our commitment to digital equity and inclusion. So through both the BEAD and the digital equity grant programs, NTIA has digital equity as a core requirement. This is not something extra or nice to do, but it's really built into the center of these grant programs. And from our perspective, the grant programs will not be successful unless they center digital equity and inclusion. And the wonderful team at NTIA will go into depth about all of this, but just to reiterate, from the federal perspective, we're really committed to addressing the connectivity gap among all Americans, but really focus on those traditionally underserved covered populations that we'll go into in more depth. We are so lucky and happy to be joined here today by the team from the National Digital Inclusion Alliance. So I'm going to introduce them now. To my left is Amy Huffman. She's the Policy Director of the National Digital Inclusion Alliance, NDIA. Amy is a public servant, systems thinker, innovative policy expert, and storyteller with a passion for closing the digital divide. Prior to joining NDIA, Amy served as the state of North Carolina's first digital inclusion and policy manager for the Broadband Infrastructure Office. Also has a background in freelance writing and consulting. Amy holds a master's degree in public administration and a bachelor's degree in political science from UNC Chapel Hill, and we're really happy you could travel up to join us today. Also welcoming Paulo Balboa, the senior programs manager with NDIA. Paulo has been with the NDIA team since 2020. He began his career in public library education and outreach, working in both Cleveland and at the New York City Public Library. He also worked with the Mozilla Foundation to develop a web literacy toolkit. He received his master's in library and information science with an emphasis on data visualization from the Pratt Institute, and is joining us from Brooklyn, New York. So very warm welcome to both of you. Welcome to Maine.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you for having us. I'm actually going to present over here. So thank you, Brooke. Thank you, Maggie. Thanks all for hosting us. Speaking for myself, this is my first time in Maine, so I'm thrilled to have enjoyed many lobster variations and delights. I learned last night that blueberry muffins are sort of like a Maine staple food, and that was reinforced by the previous session. So I feel like I'm getting like the big tour of Maine on this trip. But we're really thrilled to be here, and we're really thrilled to share with you some core components, some best practices around building strong digital equity partnerships across your state. A lot of what we're going to be discussing in this session is based upon the way that NDIA works, which is communicating with our community across the country to learn about best practices and then share out those best practices and repackage them for communities who need them and apply them in their own ways. So I'll give you an idea of what we'll be discussing today in a little bit of a truncated agenda. I know that people might be getting hungry and lunch is coming up. So I'll be giving you a short introduction into who we are, how we came to be, and the sort of work that we do. And then I'll send it over to my colleague Amy to talk about meaningful community engagement and also those best practices for engagement. That line 4 for activity, we will not be doing given the layout of this room, but Amy will be describing a resource that just came out earlier this week, actually, that we're really excited for folks to dig into. And then I'll be closing out with digital equity coalitions. Because we have a shorter session today, we'll have plenty of time at the end for Q&A, so come with some questions prepared. Presenting comes semi-naturally to me and Amy, but we're also, I think, better working off the cuff and reacting to your questions as they come. So we're hoping that the presentation today can give you some thought-provoking questions. So a little bit about who we are. We started officially in 2015 as a 501c3 nonprofit with the mission of advancing digital equity across communities. But speaking for myself, and I think speaking for most people in this room, the issue of digital equity has existed long before 2015, right? That's just when we came into being. As long as communities and individuals have had access to the internet and have needed some assistance or guidance navigating that internet, the issue of digital inclusion and digital equity has existed. So we are here to advance digital equity by supporting both community programs and supporting policymakers to act. So we work at this intersection between programming and policy. We're a network of over 1,000 affiliates. Before 2020, this number was in the low 300s, and also our internal staff was only that of 4 or 5 people. So as the community has grown, we have also grown to meet the needs of diverse changes and needs. We're at 48 states plus territories. Every time I do this presentation, I always forget the remaining 2, but there are 2 that we haven't gotten yet. I think South Dakota is one of them. Anyway, doesn't matter here. And also, we're in Maine. And also, we're made up of tribal entities. We really try to make our community as inclusive as possible to bring in new voices, new perspectives. Especially in the past 2 years, we've seen this huge growth in the types of individuals and organizations who have first heard about digital inclusion and digital equity. Maybe it's been added on to their job description. Maybe they had a personal experience of, for instance, bad bandwidth when they're sharing a Zoom call with 4 other people in their home, right? But either way, the COVID-19 pandemic has really shined a light on digital equity and why it matters, and we see that reflected in the IIJA. The part of the education that we do is based on aligning the community members that we're working with, the practitioners that we're working with, also the policymakers that we're working with, on aligning on a set of shared definitions. Speaking for myself, when I first learned about and came to NDIA in 2017, 2018, I was still a computer class instructor at the Cleveland Public Library, and I was really proud of my work. I was teaching classes, but I didn't know that there was a larger community of practice of other people who think this way until NDIA came to Cleveland that spring. When I came to that conference, I was like, oh my gosh, here's a bunch of other people who, some have my exact job in another city, some have a version of my job, but they don't call it that. And NDIA really exists to get people to share those same definitions so that when we're going out into our communities, talking with our friends, family members, neighbors, policymakers, that we're using these shared definitions to make sure that in Maine, as a community, we're pushing digital equity forward, but also across the country. So digital equity, also all of these definitions were co-created with our community, so we're really engaging quite frequently. Digital equity I like to think of as the goal. It's this condition in which all individuals and communities have the information technology for full participation in our society, democracy, and the economy. What does that mean in practice? Think of at the beginning of 2020, when COVID was a twinkle in everyone's eye. Everyone knew that it was a census year, it was also a presidential election year. Those were two modes of engagement in society, democracy, and the economy that typically would have involved maybe door-to-door canvassing, maybe some email blasts, maybe some paper mail campaigns. COVID-19 really made it clear that access to the internet is essential for participating in society and democracy and the economy, but access wasn't enough. People needed to know how to use those technologies. People needed to know how to navigate a voter registration form online. People needed to know how to upload documents. These things that folks in this room probably take for granted are not very easy, right? Part of this is having affordable broadband that's reliable, but also having an appropriate device on which to use that, to use the internet, and also having the skills and know-how to get through that. These two images highlight the difference between equality and equity. I think we've seen probably a different version of this image in different ways, but just really quickly to summarize, the image on the left, equality, each person is a different height, and they have a different viewpoint of the world, they have a different perspective. They're all given the same amount of resources, the same books to stand upon. And while there is an equal distribution of resources, it only exacerbates existing inequalities, right? That height difference remains the same. What we're talking about here is equity. It is harder. You see in the image on the right, there is an uneven distribution of resources, books in this example, and it is harder to do that because in order to understand where these three people are in life in that image on the right, there needs to be some kind of conversation with them to figure out where are they, what are their needs, and also some research. So this is where digital inclusion comes in. This is the work of how to get to that goal of digital equity. Digital inclusion is aligned along those three prongs that I described earlier: affordable and reliable home broadband, an appropriate device, and also the digital literacy skills and know-how to access and use the internet. Finally, there's the digital divide. I think this is the phrase that we've all heard of before, right? Raise your hand if you've heard of this one. Keep your hand up if you had heard of digital equity before 2020. Cool. There's a lot of smart people in this room. But digital divide simply is the gap between those who have affordable access, skills, and support, again, those three prongs, to effectively engage online, and those who do not. So typically, this is, we see the digital divide along these common measures of community success. So whether that's racial lines, income lines, people with disabilities, people in rural areas, as Maine is very aware of, and older adults. For folks who are familiar with or have heard about the Digital Equity Act before today, you might see this column on the right aligning with some of the covered populations that are defined in the Digital Equity Act. So to talk about that, I'll send it over to Amy.
Thank you, Paolo. And thank you to all of you in the Maine MCA and Maine Broadband Coalition, and you guys have a lot of acronyms here too, so I'm going to get them all wrong. But thank you for having us here and for the incredibly warm welcome that you've provided. I really like Maine. I came this summer to Acadia National Park, and it's just beautiful. And Brooke, I agree, all of your colleagues are jealous that you get to focus completely on Maine, because what you all are doing here is really, really special. And I'm not seeing this across the country, so I want to say that before I move in. So how many of you are already familiar with the Digital Equity Act? Okay, most of you. But so the Digital Equity Act was actually introduced in 2019 by Senator Patty Murray from the state of Washington. And it was reintroduced in 2021 and then subsequently included in that full $65 billion that was part of the Infrastructure Act and that $65 billion broadband package, right? So there's $2.75 billion set aside from Congress for the Digital Equity Act. and it's split into 2 programs and 3 grants. So what you all heard about yesterday, the announcement from NTIA on the BEAD program and the planning dollars, that's what we're talking about today. So the State Digital Equity Capacity Grant Program is the first program included in the Act, and there's a competitive grant program as well. The State Digital Equity Capacity Grant Program is split into 2 grants. So it's the planning grants with the funds that were announced yesterday, and then the capacity awards, in other words, implementation dollars to go and implement that plan. So once the states and territories and the District of Columbia have created digital equity plans, a year from now, they'll be able to apply for funds to go and implement those plans and receive those funds for 5 years in order to do that. So the planning process is really critical to ensure that you have funding going forward to actually implement and do the work, right? The competitive grant program is a $1.25 billion set aside for local organizations across the country to apply directly to NTIA to receive funding to do digital equity and inclusion work. We expect those applications to come online sometime in mid-2024. So just be on the lookout for that. That sounds like a long time from now, but the planning process that you're about to embark on as regions and as the state will really help inform your application when you get to that point. So as Paulo mentioned and Brooke mentioned as well, in the Digital Equity Act, Congress really wanted to ensure that states and territories in the District of Columbia are really focusing and honing in on increasing equity, not just equality. And by lifting up specific people who have historically been left out of the digital economy and society. And they created a term, because Congress has to always create new terms for us to get on board with, called covered populations. And there's 8 covered populations included in the Digital Equity Act, and they're listed here for you. But these are, typically the people who have been left out of the digital society, right? Rural folks, which we know a lot of folks across Maine live in rural areas, have been left out of the digital economy because of a lack of access, but also a lack of probably digital skills opportunities, right? And then, of course, the rest of the list. So really, and we wanted to highlight this for you all because as you all go throughout this year-long or 9-month essentially planning process, it'll be really, really important to ensure that you're talking to people in these covered populations, understanding their needs, and then designing solutions that meet their specific needs to fund in the implementation portion of the planning process. Okay, so we're going to move into meaningful community engagement, which I suspect none of you are strangers to, given that you're all here. But quickly, why is community engagement important in a broadband or digital equity planning process? Anyone? You need buy-in. Buy-in, yes. What else? Funding. From the people. Yeah. What else?
Discovery of what their expectations are.
Discovery of what people's expectations are. Anything else?
Meeting people where they are. We had a comment.
Yeah.
If they don't sign up for internet and the internet thing goes down, we don't have programs.
Right. So essentially, you all just said exactly why community engagement is important. It's really, really important to co-create these plans with community for buy-in, to ensure that you're meeting people where they are, to ensure that when the internet actually shows up at their house, fiber line is built to someone's house, they know why they need to subscribe to it, they know who to call. All these reasons are really important. And especially really understanding what people's needs are will inform, and it should inform the plan that you create and the solutions, right? So meaningful community engagement in the context of this plan is not a one-time event. This is wonderful, but this is the start. This should not be the finish line. It is a continuous process. Importantly, it's not marketing. When I was here earlier this summer, actually, I was really, really excited because we stopped by a gas station in a very, very rural area. And I went up to the counter and there was a flyer from one of your broadband coalitions talking about broadband. I was like, oh, look at this, it's amazing. That is amazing. That marketing is essential, but engagement goes beyond marketing, right? And then in addition, it is really this continuous effort of building relationships. It's all about relationship building, right? It's not just talking at people, it's talking with people. And it should result in the creation of a collective vision for digital equity for individual communities and the state as a whole, right? The state is tasked with bringing forward a vision of what digital equity looks like in Maine as a whole, not in each individual community, but as Mainers. Is that how you say Mainers? Is that right? As what Mainers would like digital equity to look like here as a whole, right? And so to do that, the state needs a really deep understanding of what that looks like across the state in each individual community. And importantly, it is a collective co-design of building solutions and, again, understanding those barriers to digital equity for each individual covered population and the entire population as a whole. So throughout the planning process, again, community engagement is not just something you do at the beginning and the end. It is going and should be embedded throughout the entire process and then moving on into implementation. This is going to be a thread that runs through the entire process. So, but you start with, you have a couple key steps that community engagement will be involved with. And so first, in identifying resources, identifying partners, identifying barriers, identifying all sorts of people who are doing the work across the state. This is the start of your planning process, and community members should be involved in that process, right? Next, you're gonna plan for the plan, right? And then also begin that public outreach, that engagement, meetings like this across the state to get at what are people's concerns? Why can't they get online? What are the unique things that are happening to them that prevent them from being online? We recommend that, actually Maine is a great model of this, of having a core planning team around the state to help shepherd this planning process with representatives across the state. And Maine's, you all are already doing that, so bravo to you. But that's a really good way to ensure that voices are at the table throughout the entire process. Then once you have your plan in place for how you will create a plan, then you launch, right? Start this process, gathering information, understanding what people need, figuring out different data points, who has access to broadband, at what speeds across the state, and is it affordable? What are they paying? What are the reasons why it's not affordable? All those sorts of types of things. And then you'll need to analyze that data and then create strategies with that data for closing those gaps, right? And then finally, you'll have your report. You'll have your plan, your statewide plan, and you'll submit that to NTIA. But there is embedded in this planning process, there's actually a 30-day public comment period, and that's where other folks across the state can say, hey, we'd like to add this, or it's missing this. And so in that process, it will be important for all Mainers to know that this plan's available and that they can provide comment. And then so you see the report, it's not the end, right? Just the plan is only a means to getting where we want to go. Once we have the plan in place, and then it's time to implement the plan with partners, because as you all know, this work is inherently local. It's person to person. Training somebody how to use a computer doesn't happen in a room like this. It happens in a community, at a library or a school, right? Talking one-on-one with people. And so if those people aren't at the table throughout the planning process, those programs won't be as successful. Then finally, evaluation will inherently need to include community. It's really important to being able to report accurately on what's going on, but also to be able to pivot if things aren't working. You need to hear from the people doing the work. Okay. We do recommend that states create a core planning team, and then for any of you regional partners, this might be a similar model for you to undertake when you're starting on your planning process and also all of the other things that you're tasked with doing as regional partners. This is really, that graphic should say something more like 6 to 15. And we think anywhere between 6, 15 people to be part of a core planning team can help, again, shepherd the process. It should come from a wide variety of different partners and different types of organizations. But one I want to lift up are lived experts. So lived experts are people who live within the digital divide, who have that direct experience of understanding what it's like to not have the internet in their home. I expect many of you are lived experts, right? If you're having to go to your neighbor's house to get on Zoom, that means you understand directly what the challenges are of not having internet at your home. And so we really encourage both states, but also you regional groups as well, to include folks who have this direct lived experience, because the people who have that lived experience are often best suited to offer suggestions for what solutions look like. And again, we are not going to go through this activity today, both because of this room layout and for the sake of time, but I wanted to let you know that after today, you will receive from the conference organizers links to our Digital Equity Plan Toolkit, which has a lot of planning resources, but also has some best practices for digital inclusion programming as well. And in that toolkit, on page 108, Appendix C.1, please, you can just look at the toolkit and then go there, navigate there. But that is the actual appendix. There's a worksheet that helps you begin to start jotting out and listing out potential partners that are most likely already in your various communities to bring to the table for this planning effort, but then the planning and implementation effort. And with that, I'm going to pass it back to Paulo to talk us through how to build digital equity coalitions and how impactful they are.
Great. Thanks.
No, never.
Oh.
I left my book. I'll get it later.
I like hiding behind the desk. So. Yes, I want to talk in closing a little bit about the importance of specifically digital equity coalitions, right? The Maine Broadband Coalition is incredible and amazing, but with the state planning process, there's also through that state planning process, there will also be the creation of local digital equity coalitions and also local digital equity plans that will certainly be informed by the toolkit that Amy was just mentioning. A phrase that we've been kicking around at NDIA recently, because this is like a newer space for us, is in reaction to this question of why digital equity or why build a coalition. Certainly in the context of today's presentation and today's summit, we want to build digital equity coalitions because the Digital Equity Act requires us to do so. That's great. From that, there will be many great partnerships and many great programs and new policies coming out of that. But also, we should have digital equity for digital equity's sake. It's important that someone like my neighbor or my mom should be able to connect with whomever they want without any hassle or need. Coalitions really build up and uplift this idea of a digital inclusion ecosystem, right? So another definition, I'm definition guy here today. A digital inclusion ecosystem is this, again, it's this combination of programs and policies that are a reaction to and a thoughtful solution to the geographic and demographic uniqueness of the communities that you serve. whether that will be at the regional level, the county level, the hyper local level in your neighborhood. Digital inclusion ecosystem is building upon, responding to the needs of the communities that you're working with. These coordinating entities working together in an ecosystem are coalitions, right? They address all aspects of the digital divide, including broadband, devices, and skills. Coalitions work with each other to co-produce, share resources among themselves to create meaningful and impactful digital inclusion programming. They do the work together. A lot of coalitions, or a lot of digital equity practitioners and organizations are made up of really small shops that don't necessarily have the capacity to do all of the work themselves. Thinking back to my experience when I was working at the Cleveland Library, I was in the department with 15 other coworkers who were also, teaching designing computer classes, but I was the only one who was like, there's a bigger world out here. We should get people to care about this. So even though I was a part of a big organization, I felt like I was alone in this world, and I didn't really have a shared community to affect the digital divide for members at that point in Cleveland. So sharing resources among yourselves, and also sharing awareness and advocacy to uplift digital equity as a shared goal for the community that you're serving. Earlier this year, we did a pretty informal poll of the NDIA community, asking who is involved in coalitions. We see some of the familiar players here: libraries, nonprofits of a variety of stripes, mostly social service organizations, higher education K through 12. I just want to take a quick pulse of the room here. Raise your hand if you see yourself reflected in this poll, and take some time to read through this. Economic development, I know there's a few folks here. Health, housing, most of the room. Keep your hand raised if you are currently involved in a coalition. Great, you guys. Educate your peers. It's so important, the work that you're doing. I did see, and this is just for folks who are watching on Zoom, a few hands went down. That's fine. I encourage you all to get involved with local digital equity practitioners. Get involved, meet people at this summit. That's what this summit is, one of the main goals of this summit, for people to meet each other, share ideas. This idea of coalition building, and most importantly, sharing the load. So I'll close off there and invite Maggie on stage to talk about the state digital equity planning process.
Thanks.
Thank you all for that. And I just want to say a couple of words about the development of our own state digital equity plan and the ways that you can be involved, and then we're going to jump right into the Q&A so everybody has time to ask their questions. So one of the decisions that we made at MCA early on in this process was to combine the development of our BEAD plan and our digital equity plan. So if you hear reference to Maine's Broadband Action Plan, that's what that means. It's a combined process. And my colleague David was listening to a broadband podcast in the car this morning, and they said, BEAD without equity is just bad. So we're just, I thought that sort of embodied the way that we're thinking about this planning process for Maine. In terms of the timeline, we've spent the last few months really bringing partners together, and our plan is to continue this planning process through June 1st, when we hope to have a draft plan released for public comment. So the month of June, I want you to set aside in your calendars to comment on that plan, mark it up, and be in touch with us so that we can really make sure it has everyone's fingerprints on it. Between now and then, obviously, there's a lot that's going to happen that you can be engaged in, but I just want you to put June in your calendars. So the first thing that we did was convene a digital equity task force back in June. And the task force is really shaped around that list of covered populations that you saw on the screen. We were looking for partners who either represent or are members of those covered populations, and folks who could come in maybe with more than one perspective. So we have folks there who are veterans who happen to work with nonprofits that are serving people with disabilities. So if you are someone who is a member of any of those covered populations, you want to be engaged, please be in touch with me. We also, as you have heard, are working with our regional and tribal partners. They were announced yesterday. We're working to invest in their capacity and staffing to be able to engage with us in this process. And those regional and tribal partners will be developing their own digital inclusion coalitions and actually working with those coalitions to develop regional and tribal plans. And those plans are going to be incorporated and built into our state plan. There are a couple of holes, I think, on our State Digital Equity Task Force, which I'll just mention in case anyone is listening at home or listening in this room and wants to recommend some folks to us. We particularly would love a partner who has a great view on connectivity issues and digital equity issues related to people who are incarcerated or formerly incarcerated. So that's an open invitation. And also would love to have some more representatives for young people and people who are unhoused. So there are some perspectives that we really want to draw into this conversation that we don't yet have. So please be in touch with me if you want to be part of that. The other thing that's happening right now is our digital equity asset inventory. You heard Amy and Paulo talk about how important this is. It's a required part of our process. We are contracting with the University of Maine Center on Aging to find out all of those resources that we have here in Maine that we can leverage and scale to accomplish this great feat that is ahead of us. So if you know about a digital inclusion plan, if you know about a digital equity program, we invite you to get in touch with us through either the info email address at MCA or to me directly, so that we can connect you with our researcher and make sure that those assets are included in that asset inventory. We plan to have that, at least the first draft, done by the end of December, and then we'll be working with our regional and tribal partners to make sure it actually reflects what they see in their regions and their communities. So that's an important piece. And then I just want you to put another piece into your calendar. February, March, and April is the key time when outreach is going to be happening. So community meetings, surveys, focus groups, all those things are planned for that period of time in 2023. And we would ask that if you want to be engaged in this process or just be kept informed about this process, to please go to our website, because I know Brian has created a place for folks to just put their names, locations, organizations, email address in to that list so that we can get in touch with you and keep you informed throughout the process and engaged with us. And I think I'll stop there. But it's an open invitation from MCA and all of our partners and the folks we're working with to please be part of this process with us.
Wonderful. Thank you, Maggie, and thank you to both of you. That was a wonderful presentation. We have a few minutes for questions, and just raise a hand. Are we circulating a microphone? Yes. So just one moment so that our folks online can all hear. We had it.
I think he had one.
Are the slides here going to be available on your website or through the Maine Broadband Coalition? It would be nice to have something to show to the rest of my committee.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, we can make that happen.
Great.
Hello, my name is Alan Cornwall, and I'm with an organization that we are a digital inclusion organization. It's called Give IT, Get IT. We've been doing this for 20 years. So what we do is we take the equipment in from businesses, we look to see if we can repurpose it and get it to people in need. We do have some coalitions. The reason mine isn't really a question, it's more of an ask. We do work with some state agencies, we work with some other partners, some other nonprofits. We're a nonprofit. And we'd love to have some more broadband partners. We talk about the broadband piece of it a lot, but if you want to go to school in the evening, it's really hard to do on this device, versus doing it on this device. So we're part of the solution, and we have great stories ranging from people who are incarcerated, veterans, the homeless, so we can chat after.
Jim DeRoche, who's in the room, is a member of the Digital Equity Task Force, has been representing Give IT, Get IT there. And I know there are some organizational connections that have been made there already, but we also expect that our regional and tribal partners will have a greater connection with you within their regions as well. And definitely will work to continue to make those connections and introductions wherever we can.
I'll just say we really, at NDIA, view device refurbishers like Give IT, Get IT as a really crucial part of the digital equity ecosystem and the device ecosystem specifically, of course, but it's incredibly important to have a sustainable source of devices for folks, because that's a piece that you have to replace so frequently, right? And you can solve it in a year, everyone has a computer, and then the next year, half the population needs another computer. So it's a really important piece, so I'm really glad to hear that you've been doing that hard work and really important work for some time.
Yes, thank you. I was going to ask about that program. Can you just tell us a little bit about how it works? Is it people donate their old computers and you refurbish them and sell them for a very good price?
Sure. So, is this on? So what we do is we take equipment in from businesses. We do take consumer equipment as well. It's often not what we're giving out to people for digital inclusion because it's not quite as robust. It doesn't have the life cycle that she was just talking about. We take the hard drives out of it. We sanitize the data. The business community loves it because we're helping them solve problems. They have this equipment they don't know how to get rid of. They need to sit, a lot of these organizations have compliance, whether it's healthcare or financial or whatnot, government, and they have data compliance requirements, so we either electronically or physically destroy the hard drives, and then we recondition them to get them to people in need for either low cost or no cost. I thought the slide that someone had that had, there's 1 book, 2 books, 3 books, or whatever it was, depending on what the person can afford for what their position is, they may have a low-cost fee, or if they can't, we're going to give them the equipment they need. And it comes with Microsoft Office and antivirus, and we provide support, and we work with the National Digital Equity Center. They do a lot of the training. So we kind of have a coalition with them. Like I said, more expanding that coalition into the broadband segment would be beneficial. We want to touch as many people as possible. And matter of fact, the organization brought me on. I did technology sales for 20 years. At the start of this year, a few of the board members knew me, and they wanted to bring me in because the demand for the output, the products that go through our system, is greater than that we were getting through our system. So they brought me in to help increase that. Jim over there does a lot of the communications and affiliations with the state. And so, it's a growing and incredible need. And the stories are amazing. It's everything from, people who are incarcerated, and they tell you that, I was trying to do my classes on my phone, and then I got a computer, and now I'm a straight A student. You just think of that from the recidivism rate. That person is now going to be a productive member of society. They're happy. They feel accomplished, and that's very impactful. And the stories range from, Jim could tell you, we just did a program with a group called Honor the Promise, and these were the people that fought right alongside the Americans over in Afghanistan. They were special forces, and when we pulled out, if we didn't take them with us, they were going to be executed. So they came over. Now they have to get citizenship, learn skills, learn language. And I think Jim might know the numbers. I think 89 computers we've been out so far for that mission to get those people. Everything's online these days. They can't get citizenship any other way.
Wonderful, thank you.
Thank you. Good morning. My name is Ivan. I'm the Digital Skills Program Manager at the National Digital Equity Center, which was just mentioned. And through Give IT, Get IT, we actually have been able to get devices out to people in need who couldn't afford them, and we provide the training, whether it is the operating system for the device they're working on, whether it is how to stream content over the internet rather than having to pay for cable, or whether it is filling out forms for the Affordable Connectivity Program, or to teaching you how to register to vote online, learning how to use Microsoft Office Suite, any Mac-based products, and it's all for free to Maine residents. We do it in coalition with libraries, adult eds, and online, and it's absolutely free. Come see us at the digitalequitycenter.org. Thank you.
Thank you. And I should say, I know many of you are probably as excited as I am that we can actually have a whole session about digital equity here in Maine without making Susan do all of the content and talking. So I know Susan is listening. She's in California today. And she is the co-chair of our Digital Equity Task Force and will be providing facilitation and support to all of our regional and tribal partners as they develop their own plans. So if you were wondering where Susan is, her team is here, and the rest of us are still benefiting from her support as well. Are there other questions?
Maggie over here.
Oh, sorry, Chris.
I actually don't have a question. I just wanted to make
You want to make me? Yeah. Okay. All right.
Chris Waite with Four Directions. Big fan of Jim's group. What they're doing is amazing. But the reality is the point of entry for most people is their handheld devices. Where are we looking at for sort of the coding on mobile accessible websites, especially state, LIHEAP, wherever these people really need to get to first before they get to that stage? Are we making available the platforms on the mobile devices that they're going to be using?
So I think that actually, particularly the state-owned websites is something that the state should look at through the planning process to ensure that it is secure, no one feels uneasy giving the state their information, that it's all kept secure, that it's easily used. That's not, the user interface is anyone can pick it up and work through it. It's not hard to find things like, I don't know if the FCC is listening, but like their website's really hard to navigate, right? You don't want the state website to be that way. But, there's a limited amount of dollars for capacity awards, and so state's going to have to make hard decisions on where to invest those funds and how to invest them. And then there are ways, I don't know that you have the authority to tell any business across the country that they have to make their websites mobile friendly, but that is definitely something to, potentially partner with businesses, particularly Maine-owned businesses, and have them think through that and come to the table and offer that.
On the time of accessibility
Right.
requirements, I think is being overlooked also.
And I can add that on the Digital Equity Task Force, we have several of our state agency partners who are working with us there. And I'm happy to have the opportunity to introduce my new colleague, Kira Reardon, who's sitting in the middle of the room here. Please wave. And Kira is leading our interagency broadband working group, which is a place where MCA will be engaging with all of the state agency partners. And one of the topics, along with lots of other interesting things like poll attachments, will be the digital inclusiveness of our state systems. So we do plan to have some of those conversations as part of this planning process.
I would just add one more plug for the State Digital Equity Toolkit, which Amy was talking about. In the appendix, I don't know what page it's on, I don't know which section it's in, but included in the appendix in the State Digital Equity Toolkit is a template survey that we have co-created with our community. A lot of the thrust of that survey is to, as a part of state digital equity planning, to identify barriers to access, to engage in digital equity. So in identifying barriers to access, we have included in that survey several questions that are specifically about a community member's experience signing up or using government applications or websites. So for instance, signing up for ACP, was that a prohibitive process? Did that prevent X individual from going through signing up for that subsidy. Also, what was it like in their experience to use and navigate government websites? So in this case, right, this is just a template that we've included in the toolkit, but that can be honed down to talk specifically about Maine. So I would just close by saying, like, in this community engagement process, these are ways for you to gather that information from your lived experts, from your community members, and have that survey ask them, what was your experience like from a digital inclusion perspective?
Is that survey succinct enough that it can be distilled to a mailing, since the majority of our constituents really have no internet access?
It is, yeah. We whittled it down, made some hard choices, cut those survey questions that are like babies to say, nope, it needs to be succinct and concise. And of course, it's just a template if you want to cut it down even more. Yeah, we did try to make the template align with the different requirements that states have within the planning process, though, so that it could provide the data that's needed.
And when it comes to surveying, I should mention also that we have an open RFP right now for a research partner to work with MCA throughout this process. And one of the first things they'll be doing is meeting with our Digital Equity Task Force in January and using this template that NDI has created to develop something that's very Maine specific and gets to some of the questions and issues that we need to explore to inform our plan. So we also plan to keep Amy and Paolo and their team engaged with us throughout this process. They're our key partner, I would say, throughout this. So you'll see a lot of them over the next 8 months or so. Is there one more question and then we'll wrap it up? Or are we feeling good?
I do have one other comment.
You have a nice loud voice, so I
Well, that's
believe it.
figure I'd speak up.
Oh, yeah, for people at home.
Yeah, my other comment is regarding whatever, it's Give IT, Get IT. The benefit there is the reduction in e-waste. Reduce, reuse, recycle. That agenda is accomplished as well. So in our town, one of our things is to reduce the waste. And where companies they do technology refresh on a 3-year, 4-year, whatever cycle. There's still a lot of life left in those machines, and I fully support organizations like the Give IT, Get IT, Human IT. There's several that are out there because it has that additional benefit of reducing the waste stream and other hazards that are introduced by computer equipment. Thank you.
Wonderful. Well, thank you for those questions. It's clear that you all have been doing a lot of thinking about digital equity before even getting into this room, and excited for the collaboration to continue. Amy and Paolo, thank you so much for bringing your perspective and ideas for how Maine can plug into this really important national conversation. Far be it from me to stand between this room and lunch. So thank you all. A round of applause for Paolo and Amy. Thank you.